Welcome back to the 9th episode of the Punch Plan podcast. And in this podcast, we're going to be starting off by talking about a potential matchup between Francis the Predator Ngannou versus John Bones Jones. So we're just coming off of Francis Ngannou beating Cyril Gane for the heavyweight championship and retaining in his first title defense. So now a fight between Francis and Ngannou and John Jones seems like the fight everyone still wants. Everyone wanted it right after Francis beat Stipe, and now it seems like it could be even more hyped if they promote it right, and if they're able to keep Francis in a new contract and Francis doesn't leave to boxing, and if Jones actually decides to come back, then this would be a perfect matchup, and everyone wants to see it. It's one of the greatest fighters in all times versus one of the most powerful fighters ever, and a guy who's really starting to evolve in his overall game as a whole, and in his MMA skill set in total.
Yeah, and I feel like this could be one of the biggest fights they could make in the UFC. But I mean, Francis Ngannou said that that was his last fight on his contract, and he has like injuries right now with a torn AC or MCL and injuries with an ACL, and he doesn't have good knees right now, so it doesn't look like he's gonna be fighting anytime soon. So maybe he'll get stripped, or maybe I don't know. Maybe this fight will be happening, Francis Ngannou versus John Jones, or maybe someone else in the heavyweight division, but. It's definitely going to be interesting to see where the heavyweight division goes after that Francis Ngannou versus Cyril Gane fight. And like you said, so many improvements with Francis Ngannou's game recently. In that Cyril Gane fight, we saw the patience and his wrestling, obviously, where he was able to out wrestle Gane for 3 rounds pretty much and take home the decision, which was super unexpected. No one really expected that because in that first Stipe fight, we saw a lot of flaws in his cardio and his overall game in wrestling, and you can just tell a lot of improvements have been made in his game. So, yeah, it's definitely gonna be interesting to see where he goes. But John Jones is so technical and so smart as a fighter, so this fight would definitely be super interesting.
Yeah, and yeah, like you said, we've seen so many improvements from Francis, and it would be a real shame to see him leave the UFC and just kind of get rid of all that he's gained and all of the years of experience and newfound
Yeah,
skill in MMA. And we've just heard so much about all these disputes with the UFC between Francis and the UFC. And even when he was coming to his fight versus Gane, that UFC threatened to sue him over talking with Jake Paul's manager for boxing, which is just crazy. We haven't really heard anything to this level of disputes between a UFC and a fighter. And
especially a champion.
yeah, especially a champion, and not just any champion. He's also the heavyweight champion of the world and one of the
Yeah, the
most
baddest man.
popular fighters on the roster. So it's interesting to see if Francis is going to be able to negotiate with the UFC and how much leverage he really has, as he's a big name in the sport. So he's, and of course he said that he's not going to be fighting for 500,000 to 600,000 for a purse anymore, and he wants to get way more money now for each fight. And we just seen recently with Tyson Fury and Dilian White being booked how much money they're getting just off the purse alone, with Tyson getting 32 million. And we know how Francis has
Yeah.
wanted to fight him. So if he sees that money and maybe he wants to go for the boxing, and now that his contract's up, he definitely has the possibility to do that. But it would be a real shame, as him versus John Jones would be such a crazy fight. Of course, we know the extensive history of John Jones and how amazing his resume is, and how he's been everyone that's come in his path and all these legends. And that fight alone would be crazy. And just to see Jones return, especially at heavyweight, at such a bigger weight than what he's used to.
Yeah. So much bigger of a weight, and reportedly 265 pounds according to him. So that would definitely be super interesting to see how that affects his game. Obviously, also training with the two-division world champion Henry Cejudo, who is looking to come back. But John has hopes to do the same, to become a two-division champion with light heavyweight, and now setting his sights on the heavyweight division. It'll be interesting to see if he's able to conquer, because the division is in a really weird state right now, with the champion obviously looking to be out for a while and having contract negotiation issues with the UFC, looking to maybe even go to boxing, which I don't think will happen, just because he's learned so much in MMA and has actually developed a pretty good overall game from what we thought he had. So I think it doesn't really make sense for him to go to boxing, but obviously he has that one punch power which can put anyone out. But will it transfer to boxing as badly as it affects people in MMA? Because in MMA there's more threats. There's wrestling, obviously there's grappling, and so many more other things to think about rather than just power. So boxing is just hands, and punches are coming. So it'll be interesting to see maybe if his power will translate to boxing. But obviously, yeah, if you're born with power, you're born with power, and that's really it. He has some of the most dangerous power in the UFC, and they're similar age, John Jones and Francis Ngannou, and both of them have a desire to make more money with the UFC. They both want more money, and they both are looking to get paid. So they deserve it. They're some of the best fighters in the world. Obviously, both were champions for Francis Ngannou just became champion, and John Jones was champion for a long time in the light heavyweight division, one of the most dominant champions. So yeah, they definitely deserve to be paid, and they're both such great stars, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah, and definitely for a fight of this magnitude, there's no reason why Dana and the UFC should not be paying them like so much money, especially more than Francis made. Just 600,000 was reported for his person versus Cyril Gane. So there's no reason why a fight this big should not be making that much, as this could potentially be one of the biggest fights in UFC history, especially with all the hype. Even back when Francis was just beat Stipe, everyone was calling for it, and to see how their kind of matchup plays against each other, where of course you have Francis, who's super powerful in stand up, and but now we've seen that he's developed more of a ground game and managed to out wrestle Cyril Gane in their fight. And we know how John Jones is just overall amazing fighter, has amazing wrestling, has great stand up, very creative fighter. And it depends though how Jones will adjust the heavyweight and to that new weight, if he'll be still as fast. Of course, he'll still have his amazing fight IQ, but speed will be an important thing for him when especially fighting a guy like Francis Ngannou, who's very explosive and he's very fast with his strikes, and he could just pop out and hit you with a huge bomb whenever. So
Yeah.
it's gonna be interesting to see how it affects a matchup between the two, and if Jones will still be able to continue his dominance over MMA and just his long legacy. And after that, if he were to win the heavyweight championship of the world, he's gotta be like considered like the greatest ever by the large consensus,
Yeah,
because of already of what
for
he's
sure.
done,
I
and
think so.
plus getting the heavyweight championship against a guy like Francis Ngannou, how can you like deny him at that point? Like it would just be insane.
Yeah, and I mean, I think John Jones definitely. It'll be interesting to see how that weight would affect his game. But I think Francis Ngannou, he's a big guy. He weighed in at 260 pounds against Cyril Gane, or close to that at least, 257 maybe. And he's big, but he's also athletic, like you said. He's explosive. He still is fast twitch. And he hits super hard. So it'll definitely be interesting to see how the size would play into factor. They're the same height, and Jones is very lanky, is insane reach. So yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see how they match up, and I think it would probably I'd probably edge it out slightly to Jones, just because he has so many tools in his arsenal, and I feel like Francis doesn't really have as many ways to win as John, even though we've seen an improved wrestling game. I don't think it will match John Jones's. So yeah, it's definitely interesting to see how this will play out. But you can never count out Francis with his insane power and his improvements, his overall showcase of how he's been able to evolve in the sport, how he's able to adapt to in mid fight against Cyril Gane, how he's able to adjust his game plan and just be more patient, be smarter, be more aware. And I think it would definitely be such a good fight, and one of the biggest fights they can make, because these guys are such big stars. Francis Ngannou with amazing marketability, with being the hardest puncher they've ever seen in the UFC, and John Jones, of course, being pretty much one of the best ever, if not the best ever. So it's definitely an interesting fight.
We know how confident both of these guys are. John Jones especially been tweeting after Francis and Cyril had their fight, saying if this is the apex of the UFC heavyweight, then I've got this in the bag pretty much. And we know that Francis has been talking about this fight and wants it very badly, and he was saying he's kind of over it in the, I think it was post fight interview after Cyril gone,
Yeah.
just because he couldn't get it done and it didn't seem like it was getting done. But still, I'm sure he would 100% take this fight
Yeah.
whenever, if it was ever available. And we are just all itching to see that fight.
Especially after the Stipe fight, where that fight looked like it was about to be made, but it never ended up coming to tuition. So I think Francis might have been a bit salty that that fight never came into tuition. John never actually ended up fighting. So I think he might have just been like he's just over it at that point. But he'd definitely take the fight if the opportunity was presented to him.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And also, like with Jones, in his recent fights, we've seen like a bit of hiccups in how they've been pretty close against Dominic Reyes and Thiago Santos. But I feel like definitely him coming to heavyweight, he's gonna be as motivated as possible, especially against such a scary fighter like Francis Ngannou. He's gonna make sure he doesn't want to get caught, he doesn't want to lose, especially for his legacy, and he's gonna come in 100%, and he has to, and I'm sure Francis will do the same. We'll see how he recovers after his big injuries from before the Cyril Gane fight, and we even saw how bad it is because it's pretty big tell when they have like something covering their knees. I guess because
Yeah,
I was even
knee
wondering how
pads.
come he had that, maybe for some different purposes, but we found out after that he was severely injured. So we'll see how that plays an effect once he's fully recovered, and we're all super excited to see this fight, and hopefully we see it pretty soon. And now we're going to be talking about Robert Whittaker fighting Israel Adesanya on UFC 271 and whether he's going to be able to dethrone Adesanya in their rematch.
So obviously this rematch is booked for less than 2 weeks from now, and it's definitely going to be super exciting as we have two of the best middleweights in the world. Obviously their first fight was pretty dominant on Izzy's end, where he was able to almost finish Whittaker in the first round before obviously being saved by the bell, and then getting caught again in the second round. And Israel put on a really good performance, and I think it would definitely be interesting to see how the changes get made from both parties, Robert Whittaker and Israel Adesanya, obviously coming in with different game plans and different styles than they did last time. So it will be interesting to see how each adapt and how each come in maybe with different looks. And yeah, it's super exciting to see how this fight will play out.
Yeah, and it's been quite some time since they last fought in their first fight where Izzy became the middleweight champion of the world. And through that time, they both fought a lot of different guys, like Izzy defending his belt against Yoel Romero, against Paulo Costa, against Marvin Vettori, even going up against Jan Blachowicz to try to become double champ status. Fail, obviously he didn't get it, but then Robert on his own also fought many guys like Darren Till, Jared Cannonier, and both these guys have had much time to pretty much make adjustments and pretty much adjust some of their skill sets to match. And I feel like this is definitely going to be probably a different fight than the first time. I think mostly on Robert's end, he's going to come with a different plan, as before it kind of seemed like he was trying to blitz Adesanya and kind of catch him where he was coming forward and kind of pushing in and throwing some shots, and Adesanya of course countered him many times, and that's what led to both the knockdowns on him on Robert. And I feel like through this time around, Robert's probably gonna come with a more safe approach. He might try to throw in his wrestling there. Of course, we know how he's a great wrestler, overall great fighter with an amazing skill set. And he'll probably try to switch up some stuff, as I feel like, especially if he goes with the route he went last time, it's gonna end the same way.
Especially with Robert Whittaker's last performance against Kelvin Gastelum, which was an emphatic victory, and we saw a lot of improvements in his game. And obviously, both these guys are super elite fighters and probably the best two middleweights out there right now. So that's why this is one of the most exciting matchups in that middleweight division. And there's going to be a lot of hype between this fight. So it's going to be interesting to see how they match up. Obviously, as you mentioned, Robert Whittaker may be able to utilize his wrestling skills and try to give Izzy a problem, as he said that the game plan for Izzy has been exposed after we saw what Jan Blachowicz was able to out wrestle and just beat Izzy in that fight. So I think that I think that kind of was an obvious strategy even before, because obviously Israel is a kickboxer, so he's not going to have the best wrestling game, but again, you never know. He has amazing takedown defense, and he has a good ability to get back to his feet, and he knows what he's doing in there. It's not like he's a one-dimensional fighter. So he has a lot of they both have a lot of great kicks and great striking. So it's definitely going to be interesting. It's not going to be I don't see it being as one-sided as the last bout, but I do think that Israel still has the edge, considering that he's still been improving his game so much. He's been super active, and he's just he has a great mentality, and I really think that he's really the top of the middleweight division. He's just been so dominant in recent years, but of course Robert Whittaker still has a chance. He can't be counted out in this match because he could definitely dethrone Izzy. You never know, a couple of mistakes and he's blitzing in on you, and you never know. But Israel has that kind of timing style where he's able to just he knows what he's doing on the back foot, and has great
Yeah,
striking.
and I feel like it's hard to say if that plan of from Blachowicz actually would be effective for Whittaker, as Blachowicz was way bigger than Adesanya because Izzy was moving up to light heavyweight. So and
Yeah.
that's what worked for Blachowicz, but I don't know if that would work the same for Whittaker, as of course he's not as big as Blachowicz. So he would probably have to find maybe a different way. Like he could probably incorporate the wrestling, of course, but I don't know if that exact game plan would work, as well as we've seen Izzy improve. And Izzy himself has even said if he's going to try to do that again, it's going to be a big mistake for him. So it's going to be exciting to see how both guys have made their adjustments and pretty much gone better throughout their fights, and see which style will be victorious pretty much. And I feel like Whitaker in this time around will be more hungry to try to get back his belt, and more motivated to pretty much claim the throne again against Adesanya, as it looks like he's really been eyeing this rematch for a while now. And Israel, after his fight versus Marvin Vettori, the second fight, was also eyeing it, saying, "Bobby Knuckles, I'm here. You know where to find me." So I just think this is a great matchup between the two, and they have a good rivalry. Like Robert said, this is like the first, or he actually dislikes Adesanya, which is, for we know how nice of a guy Robert is. So this is rare. So it's a really good matchup, and I feel like both their styles clash very well.
Yeah, and I think this is definitely going to be an amazing fight, and I just don't know if it's going to be if Robert Whitaker is going to be have what it takes to dethrone Izzy, but the potential is always there with his style and his ability to maybe out wrestle Izzy. But as you said, Jan Blachowicz was much bigger than Israel Adesanya, who was moving up in weight to try to challenge and take that belt. Obviously came out unsuccessful, but it was still a good showing, and he showed that he has a lot of diversity, and he's willing to take those risks to go up in division and take losses. But he's so creative in his ability, and I think it's definitely going to be a good match.
Now we're gonna be talking about Ryan the Flash Garcia's return to boxing and who his next opponent may be. So it's been a long time, like pretty much a year since Ryan Garcia has been in the ring.
Yeah,
Of
over
course,
a year.
last against Luke Campbell, where he managed to get the TKO victory after getting dropped and facing some adversity, but came back strong and got the win. And now it's been a while. Obviously, he was supposed to fight Jojo Diaz
In
instead of
November.
Devin Haney, but he had that hand surgery, so he had to pull out because he was injured. But for a while now, just he hasn't been fighting, and he's been talking a lot about how he's gonna fight, and this time he's gonna fight, what date, what date. We're pretty much just kind of excited to see him come back again into the ring and to see who he fights, because of course he's a huge star in the sport at such a young age, and also he's just a pretty big influencer as a whole. So it's just unfortunate that we haven't been able to see him in the ring as much, and kind of more on social media than in the ring, as there's been a lot of rumored matchups that he could have had, and there are a lot of opponents that are possible, and we just kind of want to see him back into the ring.
Yeah, two times now his fights have been replaced by a different opponent. As in July of last year, he was supposed to fight. He was planned to fight Javier Fortuna, but that fight got canceled because Ryan was suffering from a bit of health problems, and he wasn't the best mentally. He wasn't mentally all there, so he took a bit of time off to kind of recover. But we just haven't seen him recently. And then obviously Jojo Diaz, also that fight got canceled and got replaced with Devin Haney, who was able to outpoint Jojo Diaz over the course of that fight. So I think that Ryan has an anticipated return on his hands, and people want to see him back in there because we haven't seen him in over a year now, and by the time he gets back, it'll be a year and a couple months. So we want to see these guys fight, especially because he this is like the years that he should be learning the most. He's 23 years old. He's super young in the sport, and he should be getting out there. He should be fighting as much as he can. And obviously in boxing, there's a lot of politics, a lot of fights that don't get made, especially with undefeated guys who don't want to go up against other guys who can pose a challenge and maybe take the row. And it's just unfortunate to see that because there's so many young and talented fighters that should be fighting each other, but it's just not, and it's not ending up happening. But hopefully we see some matches soon, because a lot of these guys look to be hungry. They look to be getting back in there. And Ryan Garcia, he wants to fight. He's been on Twitter for a while now saying that he wants to fight all these different guys. Cambosis, he's been calling out the current champion who just defeated Teofimo Lopez. and also eyeing a fight between him and Isaac Cruz, which is definitely an interesting matchup considering that he just fought Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia wants to fight Tank Davis as well, maybe one up him with the performance as Tank went the distance with Cruz.
Yeah, and also as well, we've heard from Canelo himself that Ryan, who's of course kind of taking Ryan under his wing, that he hasn't really been training that hard, and that he wanted to see more of Ryan in the gym, pretty much just putting the hard work and getting better. But and I feel like you said, these are the important years for him to actually improve and improve in the gaps that he has currently, and to pretty much become as best as a fighter as he can, since your development years are most important. So he needs to get experience like in the ring with better fighters, and I feel like his return, it's a really good opportunity to fight a decent fighter, maybe like Isaac Cruz, who put a lot of pressure into on Tank and had a very close fight with him. And if he's able to put on a statement, then it would be huge for him in the lightweight division.
Yeah, and I think he has some extraordinary talents, like his speed and just his power. It's crazy to see how in a blink of an eye he could put anyone down. I mean, we saw a brutal body shot get landed on Luke Campbell, which just put him out, and he just was not able to get up. He couldn't get up from that body shot. It was super devastating, and we've seen other fighters go down by huge right hands and left hands. We saw him be able to defeat guys like Romero Duno and Francisco Fonseca in the first round back to back. So this guy is super explosive and super fast. That's why they call him the Flash. So yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see him back in there. He has so many great talents, and we don't want to see that go to waste. We want to see him back in there and get more experience under his belt, like you said, under the bright lights in the ring, and just have more fights because there are a couple of flaws in his game. Like maybe his footwork isn't the best. Especially we saw a bit of gaps in his footwork when he went up against a southpaw in Luke Campbell, which could maybe pose a threat when he goes up against Tank, who's also a southpaw. So and there are other guys like Lomachenko, who's a southpaw. So we don't want to see him have these kind of gaps that he has. Also, his movement, his head movement isn't really the best, but he's able to maintain distance, but doesn't really have the best like overall movement. So I think we definitely want to see him back in there. We want to see him just improve as much as he can. Don't waste this potential that he has because we've seen so many talents from this guy, and he looks to be super sharp and super snappy with his punches. We see his shadow boxing, his speed is just insane. So we want to see him more in the ring and less on social media.
Yeah, and he was rumored to have like a lot of big fights, like such as against Devin Haney, and of course people calling for the Tank fight, which those would have been huge fights because of course Ryan's a huge star, and those guys are also big stars in the sport. And I feel like that also would have been huge to elevate his star power as a whole and into paper, like as a draw as well into boxing. But as well to that, it's also important that he gets his, like we said, his experience in the ring to improve his ring IQ and to kind of be able to compete at the highest of levels. And I feel like it's important that he gets in there and maybe immediately not against the best guys. Of course, like, well, Isaac Cruz has seemed to be good, of course, pushing Tank to a decision, but it's just really important that he gets in there and pretty much just gets fights in, and not as much time as out. Especially the more time out is just the worse for him as developing, and just that he's training and making sure that he's actually getting in the right practice.
Yeah, there's so many lightweights right now that are undefeated, or even guys that just aren't booked right now. So there are possible matchups for Ryan Garcia. I mean, some guys aren't booked. Devin Haney, George Kambosos, Tank Davis, Vasily Lomachenko, even Teofimo Lopez, who's probably going to move up to 140. So maybe he's not going to be in the picture anymore. But there are a lot of guys who are freed up right now. Even Jojo Diaz could be a potential opponent for him. And he said that he wants to come back in April. So that could definitely be possible. But I think the most likely outcome would be him fighting Isaac Cruz. As I said, I think it just makes sense that he would want that fight to try to one up Tank maybe, and just get a good fight under his win, but not like the highest level competition, like a champion.
And now we're going to be talking about some of the hottest prospects in boxing right now: Shakur Stevenson versus Oscar Valdez.
So Shakur Stevenson looks to be one of the most promising talents that we see in the sport right now of boxing, because we see him been climbing up the ranks. Obviously had that impressive, emphatic win over the champion Jamel Herring, and he made that look seamless. It was an amazing performance and just barely got hit. Honestly, his hit and not get hit style, he managed to outpoint Jamel badly with, I mean, taking pretty much every single round and being able to get the stoppage. So his last performance was amazing, and obviously Oscar Valdez's last performance as well, one of the knockouts of the year. So both of these guys have been very promising, and these guys are looking to be super hyped. They have a lot of hype behind them. Obviously, Oscar Valdez training with Team Reynoso, and Shakur Stevenson sparring with so many great talents and being backed by some of the best fighters in the world. So this is going to be such an amazing matchup, and I feel like this really determines like the future of boxing.
Yeah, some of these two are like the very best, especially at super featherweight. These are like the best fighters like in the world there, and they're just so talented and so young. Especially Shakur is so young, and Oscar's a bit older at like 31. But just to see how like young these some of these guys are and how talented they are and how skilled they already are is just crazy to see. And especially I feel like Shakur is one of those guys who could definitely gather a lot of hype behind him, and oh, he already has hype, but even more and become even a bigger star, and for the future even be probably one of the best pound for pound fighters in the world because he just has all the skills in the world pretty much. He's extremely technical, has great different combinations, has great volume. He's just amazing fighter.
Yeah, and I think this is definitely an anticipated fight because these are the two best guys, as you said, at 130 pounds, and people want to see him fight, and we don't usually get these fights, these kind of fights get made, especially when you see the two best guys in a division, the two champions, two guys that everyone wants to see fight. A lot of times in boxing, there's politics, there's things that happen, there's a lot of things that hold back a fight, but this fight looks to be in the works, looks to be getting made because April 30th is a date that's being thrown around. So that's going to be an interesting, it's going to be an interesting date to see if that comes around, which is pretty soon. It's less than 3 months, which is super exciting because this is such a great fight to be made, and so many attributes each of these guys have. Obviously, Shakur Stevenson being a super technical and tricky southpaw, and he's not as experienced as Valdez, but he has an extensive Olympic pedigree as well as amateur background, and he's such a great technical fighter, and obviously has so many things up his sleeve, and could definitely be a potential superstar in the sport of boxing because he has a lot of potential, and people think that he's probably one of the most promising, if not the most promising prospect out there right now. So it's going to be interesting to see how this fight goes because this is definitely an interesting fight to see.
Yeah, and it's honestly just so nice to see finally the two best guys in the division fighting. Like it
Yeah.
doesn't happen frequently, which that shouldn't be the case. This should be like the regular, but it's just great to see how these two amazing and overall just great fighters in every aspect of boxing are gonna be fighting, and how their skills are kind of different in certain compartments, and how they can kind of use it to their advantage in this fight. And it's for both guys, it'll definitely be their toughest challenge and to date, and their toughest fight they've had in their careers, especially with Shakur, how he's still young and not as much experience as Valdez. But this would definitely be a huge experience for him, and if he's able to beat him in such fashion, he beat Jamelin, then that would be such a big telling for him as a fighter and just for his future and how it could look.
Yeah, and there's also been talks of other possible fights for Shakur, kind of Lomachenko, who's another tricky southpaw and probably one of the best pound for pound fighters in the world right now. Which that fight would be amazing to see. And I think he definitely has a spot at 135 pounds because he's a pretty big 130 pounder. I'm pretty sure. So even though he's not the tallest, he has a decently big frame. He looks to be eyeing that division because I mean the lightweight division is the money division in boxing. It has some of the most promising stars. You have Devin Haney, Kambosos. Teofimo Lopez was fighting, even though he might be moving up. Obviously, Lomachenko, Ryan Garcia, so many, and it's really where the money fights are. So if he wants to be fighting one of those guys and get the money fight, get your star potential to be even higher, I think the lightweight division is where it's at. So if he's able to beat Valdez and then move up to lightweight, that would put on a huge statement and something that would definitely be anticipated because this guy's super talented, and it's going to be exciting to see where he goes. But we can't be overlooking Valdez. I mean, he's undefeated, 30-0, and the super featherweight champion in WBC. So I think these guys having a unification bout will definitely be interesting. But I think that stylistically, this would definitely make for a great match. Both these guys are so talented and some of the best pound for pound fighters already.
Yeah, and their style clash is just the interesting part about it. You got like Shakur, who's got that technical ability, who's able to outmaneuver fighters and hit and not get hit. And then also you got Valdez, who's very powerful, who's got so much toughness, grit, and heart, and still, of course, with the skills. So that's why I feel like this matchup is really good, and it's coming at a really good time in both these guys' careers. As I guess Valdez is kind of at his peak right now at 31, and Shakur is still kind of upping in the game, but we've seen how his skills have already progressed so much. So I feel like this is definitely a fight to look out for, and it's great that it's finally that a fight of this magnitude and with these different guys' skill sets are finally happening, and it's gonna be a super exciting one.
Yeah, and there were reports that this fight was going to be happening on April 30th, which was actually just announced to be the same date that the women pound for pound clash between Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor is going to be happening. And there's been a bit of controversy as to which fight would really be the more looked at fight, more anticipated fight. Obviously, with Eddie Hearn and Jake Paul promoting the Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor fight, that could potentially be a bigger fight than this fight, even but just because of those names and how they're going to promote that fight and how that's pretty much the decider of who the best woman boxer is in the world. So it would definitely be interesting to see how that could play into this fight. Maybe it would be on a different date. Who knows? But I think this is definitely an exciting matchup to look forward to, and I think that this could be the decider of the future of boxing.
And now we're gonna be talking about the fight that has finally been made official between Tyson the Gypsy King Fury versus Dilian the Body Snatcher Whyte. This fight has finally been made after all this discrepancy between these purse bids and them getting pushed back constantly not knowing if Josh was gonna step aside or anything. And finally, just recently we've learned that Frank Warren won the purse bid at a record-breaking price, and this is the highest purse bids ever. So both these guys are getting paid a lot, with Tyson Fury getting paid $32 million in just the purse alone, and Dillian White, who's on paper it looks like only 80 to 20 for Fury, but he's still getting paid $8 million for the purse alone, which is huge.
And that's just
And
the
that's
base
it's
as
just
well.
crazy, yeah.
Yeah, that's just the base purse. And this fight is reportedly going to be happening in April, April 23rd or 24th, I think was the reported date. I'm not really sure. So I think that's definitely going to be interesting. And obviously, as you said, the politics of this fight were looking a bit suspect as the purse bids kept getting delayed and getting canceled almost. We didn't know what was happening there, but obviously, there was mentions of Alexander Usyk stepping in and fighting Tyson Fury, and Dillian White and Anthony Joshua being kind of on the sidelines, but that ended up falling through. And obviously, we saw Tyson Fury kind of laughing on social media and making fun of Eddie Hearn and Anthony Joshua. So I mean, at least a fight has been made between Tyson Fury and Dillian White, and potentially the rematch between Anthony Joshua and Alexander Usyk is also going to be a go. Which I mean, I think it will be. Doesn't really make sense for anything else to happen at this point. So yeah, it's exciting that these fights are actually getting made now, and these are actually going to be happening, as well as Tyson Fury finally going to be active in the heavyweight division. We haven't seen him so active in recent years, obviously with his long layoff after the Klitschko fight, and how he's had a bit of issues coming into the sport. So or coming back to the sport. So it's good. It's great to see him being active again and motivated and ready to come back in there. So it's definitely exciting, and I'm definitely excited to see it.
Yeah, and as well to that, Dillian White is finally getting his long-awaited title shot that he's been pretty much asking for years now. This is a really good matchup, especially off of Fury coming off his long Wilder trilogy, and I feel like this is a good transition fight for him, as Dillian's still a powerful guy, but I feel like this is definitely an intriguing matchup, and it's told that it's going to be held in the UK, which is this is going to be the first time that Fury's fighting in the UK after a very long time. So I guess the purse bids are going to pay off, since this will probably be a very big fight there. And it'll just be interesting to see how these different styles clash between Tyson Fury, and and it's been a while since we've seen Fury fight someone that's other than Wilder. So it'll be nice to see like how he matches up against someone else than him after so long and so many years.
It'll be interesting to see how this fight will go, and hopefully this fight gets made relatively soon. Hopefully it gets booked, and we don't have any more politics going on throughout the fight. And as you said, the style clash, the style-wise, it's definitely gonna be interesting. Obviously, we have Tyson Fury, who is undefeated in boxing and has such a large frame, 6'9", an absolute titan. And then we have Dillian White, who's also super experienced in combat sports. He was a kickboxer, and then moved on to MMA, then moved on to boxing, and he's had a lot of great fights in boxing. He's had a lot of good wins as well against Derek Chisora, Joseph Parker, and obviously getting his own back against Alexander Povetkin. So I think this is definitely going to be an exciting fight, and I think it's definitely going to be a big one. It's definitely going to be a big fight, especially in the UK. To bring that one to their home country, it's definitely going to be interesting, and to see them fight back in the UK after all these years.
Even though a lot of people were banking on we seeing a unification between Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk with Joshua stepping aside, but still think this is a very good fight and a fight to look forward to pretty much, and definitely will still be good. But now I guess also along the lines of that, we're gonna see Anthony Joshua rematch Alexander Usyk for the belt and see if he can win it back. And maybe if Fury beats White and Usyk manages to beat Joshua again, we could see a matchup between Fury and Usyk, which would be such a big fight, and it would be such a big change from what we were originally all expecting in Fury versus Joshua, and just all the crazy stuff that's happened since then, and since that fight was so close to being made and just being pretty much stopped right before it was gonna happen, and which was pretty unfortunate. But now we're here, and there's still very good matchups happening between Fury and White, and it's gonna be interesting to see how motivated and ready White comes in, and he's definitely gonna be coming in like as his best possible, 100% to try to win those belts after such a long time of not getting the shot, and we'll see if it's enough to beat the Gypsy King.
Yeah, and you never know. I mean, maybe White gets this upset, and then Anthony Joshua will be able to reclaim his title, and then we have an even a bigger catastrophe as something we won't see coming at all. But you never know, especially in the heavyweight division. Anything can happen. Anyone can get hurt. Anyone can lose. So no one's invincible, and Dilian White definitely has a shot, even though Tyson Fury is one of the best heavyweights we've seen in recent years. So I think it's definitely going to be interesting. You can never count anyone out in the heavyweight division. So it's definitely going to be exciting. And I mean, White has just actually pulled out of a fight with Otto Wallin pretty recently. I think it was in October. So it will be interesting to see maybe if he can recover from that injury quick enough to challenge and be his 100% best against Tyson Fury. Hopefully he has recovered and he is okay now. But I mean, these guys also have a bit of a history together when they were in the gym, and Dillian White claims that he knocked out Fury or knocked down
Yeah.
Fury or whatever happened, but Fury obviously with the different side of it, saying that he whooped Dillian White around the ring. So who really knows what really happened in that gym? But we know that they've been in the ring together at least in sparring. So it's gonna be interesting to see how each of these guys are gonna perform.
It's gonna be interesting to see whether or not White's able to bring a new skill set that Fury has not seen before. Obviously, Fury's fought all types of different fighters like Chisora, Vladimir Klitschko, Deontay Wilder, Otto Wallin, and Steve Cunningham. But I feel like White can for sure bring a different type of style that Fury has not seen before, and it might cause him troubles, or maybe Fury will just take home the win and retain his belts. And now we're going to be talking about how Showstar Boxing can change YouTube boxing forever.
So Showstar Boxing is taking place on March 5th at the SSE Arena in Wembley, and it's going to be the first YouTube boxing event coming back to the UK since that Logan Paul and KSI event in 2018. So over 3 years ago at this point, and it's definitely gonna be interesting to see them take it back to the UK, as obviously it started in the UK with KSI versus Joe Weller, and this is definitely going to be an exciting fight as we have Deji fighting Alex Wasabi in the main event, and then FaZe Temper and King Kenny, and the whole card is about UK versus the USA. So it's a cool theme, and it's going to be interesting to see how this event goes.
Yeah, and they've been doing great marketing, having a great different promotion on pretty much all social medias, and they've been just pushing it very well to like the public and to the YouTube boxing like scene pretty much. And there's been seemed to have pretty big hype for this event, and it's a pretty big deal since of course first event since Social Gloves, which ended up in a pretty big catastrophe. But other than that, with what happened with the whole paying fighter situation, it was a pretty good event, and it was just pretty much for entertainment. So if this is able to bring the same and without the controversy, then it'll definitely be a good event. And it seems like they've been pretty much listening to fans and making matchups that everyone wants to see, like how Deji said in one of his videos before he was even on the card. if you want to see me fight on this card, just let Showstar Boxing know, and we ended up having it. As now he's the main event versus Alex Wasabi.
Yeah, and also for having Face Temper and King Kenny on the co-main event, that's also a fight that people wanted to see, and Showstar's making it happen, as well as getting someone like Wade Concept on the commentary, who's a YouTuber with over 150,000 subscribers, and he's really involved in the YouTube boxing scene. So it's good to see that he's involved on the card as well, and that he's going to be commentating because he makes great videos on these different YouTube boxing events, and it's going to be interesting to see how he performs in the commentary side of it, as he was trying to get on the Social Gloves event, but they weren't really listening. They weren't really trying to get him involved. So it's good that Showstar's kind of taking a completely different approach. And also, it's going to be interesting to see if they can learn from Social Gloves' mistake of having the price so high and promising so much. They promised that they would be paying all these guys millions of dollars, paying so much, and their event flopped. It didn't really make as much as anyone anticipated, yeah, running that event. So it's gonna be interesting if they can definitely learn from their mistakes, which I think they should be able to, because it just they definitely should not be should not be making a super high price of the pay-per-view, and if they do, they definitely should not be thinking that they're gonna make so much money, because it's a hard ask, it's a hard sell by putting entertainers and influencers. And not even really the biggest. You're not really having KSI or Jake Paul or Logan Paul, who are really the needle movers of the YouTube boxing scene. You're not really having those guys on the card, so you shouldn't really be expecting so many buys, especially for a high demand or a high price. So I think that it will definitely be important to maybe lower the price a bit, maybe $10 or lower, but it will be interesting to see what they do with the event.
Yeah, and like as of right now, it's not like it has the greatest card in the world, with not like the best fights with the most notable people in the YouTube scene, and not the most that people like really want to see, like Gib, but they definitely still have time to incorporate more people into there and more exciting fights that people will really get invested in. But it was rumored that Gib was gonna be fighting Austin McBroom on here on the main event, and I'm pretty sure Gib was even talking about how with that whole promotion with Deji was supposed to be him there against Austin McBroom, but since Austin hasn't been signing the contract, he hasn't been getting it to go. And but I feel like if Gibb is still looking for a fight, they should definitely find him someone else to fight on that card, because it would definitely bring a whole new audience. Because Deji and Gibbs audience are very similar with the UK, but still would bring even more fans to that event and would just build way more hype, as Gibbs is coming off of his huge win against Taylor Holder, where he got robbed, but the decision got adjusted and he got the win. And people want to see him fight, and him alongside Deji. Deji, of course, looking for his vengeance and kind of trying to come back from his loss against Vinny Hacker. It would make the card a lot bigger.
Yeah, and especially with Gibb making that tweet that he said Austin McBroom doesn't want to sign the papers, so let me fight someone else on Showstar. So there are other options. Maybe he's gonna find a fight on Showstar, but I just don't think it's gonna happen at this point. I think it might be too late, considering that the main event and co-main event are already booked to be Alex Wasabi and Deji and Face Tampa versus King Kenny, and it's not like he's gonna be fighting under those guys. He's probably bigger than most of them. So at least in terms of the YouTube boxing draw in the UK in the UK. So I think I think the audience that he's going to bring is definitely big, but I don't know if they're going to be able to get him on this card at this point. But he has been having a back and forth of with Slim. So maybe that's a possible fight. Maybe there's other guys like Anthony Taylor, but I think Slim is probably the most likely option that they could put him if he was to be on the Showstar Boxing event, and it just makes sense. It's also a fight people want to see, and as we mentioned, Showstar makes the fights we want to see, and Slim is definitely one that is up there, especially against Gibb. And I mean, a few other fights have been announced on this card, like Vitali versus Kristen Hanby, and Arms against Minicon. So they're not really the biggest names, and but hey, they're getting influencers, they're getting people, and there's going to be more eyes on these kind of guys, and it's definitely also an opportunity to make a name for themselves and show people who other people are in the YouTube boxing scene, and it's going to be exciting. And it's going to be interesting to see if Showstar Boxing can really change the YouTube boxing landscape, as it seems to be doing things differently as it's really listening to the fans and listening to feedback. So I hope they do well, and I hope everything is successful, and it's definitely looking promising right now with what they're doing. So
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like they're marketing it in a really smart way, as they have the whole kind of UK versus US dynamic that makes people even more invested, as we know that the prior history with KSI versus Logan Paul, which kind of had the same theme along the lines, even though it wasn't their whole marketing way that they were going about it, but this kind of still adds on to that in a way. And I feel like if they're able to do well, which uh I feel like they definitely can, especially if they add a few more people onto the card, then it could definitely adjust the ways people, or I guess the newer YouTube boxing events after that, kind of operate. Otherwise than that, it's a promising card that seems to have some still good fighters on it, with still some notable names, and it'll definitely be interesting to see how it plays out.